Typically, these webinars are offered on the first Thursday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern Time to bring you essential conversations about children, families, and the early childhood education profession. All of our webinars are free, they're recorded, they're available on our website, so they ensure that everyone, regardless of their location or schedule, can join and be part of our community. During the webinar, closed captioning is available. At the end of the webinar, we invite you to click a link that we'll provide in the chat so that you can have a live Q&A session with our panelists. And after this webinar, you'll receive an email with resources to help you dig further into the conversation that we're going to have today. For over 20 years, the CAYL Institute has been working to advance the next generation of leaders in early childhood education. You can learn more about our work by following us on Facebook, watching our YouTube channel, or visiting our body of work on our website. We were so inspired by your enthusiastic response to our 2024 series on courage. Your engagement is what drives us forward. And as we move into 2025, the landscape around the whole entire education field is definitely shifting. Many of us are asking ourselves and each other, what is the way forward? To address this question, we hope you'll share your thoughts with us in the chat. We see many ways moving forward. The way forward has to include focusing on our children. The way forward has to include a strong focus on our profession and the people who work in it. The way forward also has to examine the public policy that surrounds our field. We'll focus on these topics in 2025 as we talk about the way forward. And last month, we lifted up the importance of resilience as we think about moving forward. And today, we're going to start the conversation about our children by thinking about technology in the settings that we work in with children. We remember the words of educational reformer John Dewey, who told us, even at the beginning of the 20th century, that if we teach children today the way we taught yesterday, we will rob them of tomorrow. But how do we apply this wisdom to the fast-moving pace of children with technology? Most of us would quickly agree with Christian Lois Lange, a Norwegian peace advocate who advises that technology is a useful servant, but a terrible master. And even Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft, points out the importance of educators when he said that technology is just a tool, that it really takes the teacher to get kids working together and motivating them. So with all of these philosophies, how do we move forward as early childhood educators? In all types of families, we see that children's engagement with technology is unparalleled because technology is infused into their lives from infancy, and young children don't know and can't even imagine how to live life without it. They're growing up with user-friendly, familiar conversational technology like Siri and Alexa. It's so common to see babies and toddlers and preschoolers using these devices. For them, it's fun because they're seeing videos, they're watching movies. It is fun for them. In fact, 1/3 of parents say their children begin working with smartphones before the age of 2. And 30% more of them say their kids start working with smartphones between the ages of 3 and 4. But what do we really know about these tiny tots and technology? How soon should they be exposed to it? What's the impact that it has on child development or even on parenting? There are very many sources of advice about this, but how we build our knowledge and practice base to respond to all of this technology in the lives of children is something we're still figuring out. So one source of advice is the American Academy of Pediatrics. And at first they said there should be no screens, absolutely no screens of any kind for children under the age of 2. Then they updated the guidelines, relaxing them a bit. And now their advice is children under 18 months should not watch screens at all, except perhaps video chatting with grandma. And then after 18 months, they say, instead of an outright ban, parents should introduce screen time on a limited basis with high quality programming, if the parents or family members are watching alongside the children. That recommendation holds for children aged 2 to 5, and they want to limit screen time to 1 hour of high quality programming that is co-watched with an adult. So when you think about the American Academy of Pediatrics and many other expert guidelines, one of the things that you see that they have in common is that they put the responsibility on educators and parents to set the rules. But assuming that responsibility in a developmentally appropriate way is not always so easy, not easy at all. So what is the way forward? Technology changes quickly. It can be hard to stay on top of all the apps and the sites that our children are using. We would recommend that if you want to try to keep tabs on the changing technology landscape for children, you might want to visit the Family Online Safety Institute or Common Sense Media. We have to keep an eye on the evolving research, knowing that we still have a lot to learn. And today we're going to hear some expert tips on how we as educators can move forward. We value your input and hope you will write in the chat what you think are some appropriate or inappropriate ways of using technology with the children we serve. And we're really interested in your thoughts as we listen to our panel today. Our first guest is going to be Christine Snyder, the Director of Child and Family Childcare at the University of Michigan. She's going to cover some of her research into technology, how access issues have changed, and the evolution in terms of how we work with technology in early childhood education. Our second speaker is going to be Norma Schwartz, who's the Director and Educator of Family Partnerships at the Waterford organization. She's going to talk about incorporating technology into early childhood education programs in a developmentally appropriate way, including some teaching strategies she gives to teachers as she's coaching them. And our final speaker is Ronah Harris, a learning scientist from New York. She's going to dive into some guiding principles about how to balance screen time and nurture critical skills that will help our children. So let's begin by hearing from Christine. Welcome, Christine. So happy to hear about your research and how we can work with young children using technology. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Valora. I appreciate you inviting us here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this important topic and a wonderful introduction to get us started. I also want to briefly thank the entire staff at CAYL Institute, the behind the scenes work that happens to bring this information to you all. And of course, to thank all of those in attendance or watching this recording. We appreciate your investment and interest in this topic. So as Valora said, my name is Christine Snyder. I'm the Director of Child and Family Care at the University of Michigan. I'm also a part-time lecturer at Eastern Michigan University, where I'm also a PhD student, and I'm going to talk a lot about my research and my studies there. I also want to mention that I have a husband and 2 young children. My children are 12 and 6, and so they come into my stories periodically. And I'm really going to focus this first part talking on my research that focuses on a term relatively new called technoference. And it's a blend of the word technology and interference, thinking about the way that technology interferes with our personal relationships. There are some accompanying words, technoavoidance, which is the tendency for us to lean into technology if we become uncomfortable. So technology and avoidance of something that might feel difficult or uncomfortable in a relationship. In a parenting situation, this might be, your child having an emotional outburst and leaning into technology either to have a break from the stress or to seek solutions. Sometimes also referred to as phubbing, which would be phone and snubbing. And so being in social spaces, but leaning away from the social interaction and instead into phone use. So in my research of technoference, I facilitated a qualitative study in which I had conversations with parents of young children, birth to 5 years old. My focus is early childhood. And in that study, one of the things that stood out to me from one of the participants, she said, when children go to school and they fill out those, surveys and it asks questions like, what's your mom's favorite food? Or what's your mom's favorite thing? She said, I would never want my child to say her phone is her favorite thing because they are my favorite thing. And that really stood out to me because I think as adults, and we think about the children in our lives, we would want our children to know and think and trust and believe that they are absolutely the most important part of our life, and it's not our phone. And so I carry that story into thinking about understanding both opportunity and risk. Technology does remarkable, amazing things for us. We're all here together because of technology. We really wouldn't fit well together in a tiny little coffee shop, though I would love to be in person with you. While there is this opportunity to connect in ways that we wouldn't be able to otherwise, there's also risks. So you've logged into Zoom. Hopefully you're not doing it while you're driving. That could be an actual risk. But when we think about other opportunities and risks in our lives, we drive cars, we get on buses, we get on planes, we understand the opportunity and the risk. Time in the sun, consuming certain substances and certain amounts could either be an opportunity or a risk. And so we already know how to kind of gather information to make calculated risk or informed risk. And that's what we're going to talk about in this next portion here. I'm going to describe some of the risk and also some of the opportunity. And my colleagues are going to share even more ways and strategies that we can use technology in developmentally appropriate and effective ways. So I want to start by talking about kind of the nuances of technology and how some of that has changed over time. In Valora's introduction, she talked about the American Academy of Pediatrics' initial recommendation for no screen time for children under 2 years old. And what we understood from that is that not all screen time had the same impact. And if we think about the importance of relationship, we think about technoference specifically being a risk, the interference of technology and relationship. Things like video chat or shared experiences with technology can mitigate what we understood about that risk under 2 years old. And so we know there's going to be adaptations over time in how we understand what exactly might be the risk. Is it the device? Is it the content? Is it the relationship or situation in which the technology is being used? Additionally, technology develops very rapidly. If you are anywhere near my age bracket, you might recall the day when we were using floppy disks to play Oregon Trail as a way for us to learn technology and navigate, the on-off button and the monitor. And I'm not even sure we had a mouse back then. Those experiences with technology didn't do anything for me in learning how to use Zoom or learning how to use Google Sheets. That technology develops so rapidly that what children are exposed to in the very early years aren't necessarily informative of what they're going to need in later years, because we know technology is going to change. Additionally, 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I was a young child, there was an emphasis on a need to expose young children to technology so that they wouldn't be left behind with technology literacy. And what we know now is that children have significant access to technology. There's less of a gap there in access to being able to use it. So even when you go into, say, McDonald's, you order food on a touch screen. Most children see, observe, and maybe even utilize smartphones and other devices in their home settings. For me at this point, I'm not trying to help my children understand technology. I need my children to help me understand technology. And so we're seeing the shift from a need to expose children and also a risk of overexposure. The other component about the nuances of technology and how we know that's changed over time is the ease of access and targeted marketing toward children's development specifically. A good marketing strategy is to get brand loyalty by age 2. That's used across the board, not specific to technology. But they design devices to be accessible for the simplest user, which is a child. And for us as adults, when we think about the boundaries and the limits and how we support and think about children's relationship with technology, we need to remember that it's not necessarily altruistic or always even ethical. I'm not going to put any companies or programs on blast on a recorded Zoom, but it's worth recognizing that when developers produce something, most of the time, they're looking to sustain their business. Of course, they might also have an interest in supporting children's development. But in the way that technology develops faster than we can keep up and keep children informed for future use, there's also a lag in the research that helps us understand both the short-term and the long-term implications of time spent on technology. And so we are starting to see increased research on duration of technology use. We're starting to see research on the implications of social media. But social media for young children is still only around 20 years old. I think I made my first Facebook profile around 20 years ago. And so when we think about long-term effects, there isn't extensive research that says a 5-year-old who first was exposed to social media 10 years ago is now 15, and therefore, how is that going to impact them when they're 30, 35, 40, and so on? And so the research is going to have a lag on what we understand the long-term implications are. So we're always going to do our best with the information that we have, but it's good to recognize and think about what is the function of this device, what is the function of this content, and use the resources that Valora talked about, commonsensemedia.org being my very favorite. Those resources are going to do some of the legwork for us as adults trying to make good decisions about children's experiences with technology. So let's talk further about human behavior and relationships. One of the pivotal reasons that technology has changed the way that we exist, both an opportunity to access connection with one another like we're doing today, that disruption in relationship occurs differently than it did before. So I've already alluded to my age, but you can imagine that when I was a child, my mom had a corded telephone that she would receive phone calls on from her friends, maybe while she was cooking dinner. And during that time, while I was playing, the phone would ring. My mom would be distracted from interacting with me, but I would still get from her the conversational pattern of speak and pause. I would hear the emotion in what she was describing. I would have exposure to vocabulary and language. I would hear about the neighborhood gossip that she was sharing with her friend. And so even as a passive participant in that phone call disruption, I would still be gaining some social understanding from the situation my mom was in. Similarly, when we would go grocery shopping, if my mom would get stopped by someone she knew, which happened almost every time we went, that I would get to observe that real in-person conversation, the give and take, the back and forth, conversational pattern, the shared emotion, the kind of mirroring of emotions of two people in person, all those things I described on the phone call example as well. What's different about the way technology interrupts us is when we get a text message, which now I am still young enough to keep my ringtones off, despite having grown up with Oregon Trail. There isn't even a notification that a disruption has occurred, but it's going to grab my attention, or that notification might come through on a smartphone or a smartwatch or a different device that might grab our attention. But if it's a text message, say from a friend, I look at it, I respond. The people that I'm with aren't receiving any information about what's happening. They aren't receiving the vocabulary and language exposure. They aren't observing the emotional response. They don't see the give and take exchange of a social conversation. And so that disruption from technology becomes very closed, and it's minimizing or limiting what children can learn about social interactions simply from observing. Additionally, the technology is designed to suck us in. It is designed to get our attention. I know I'm not the only person who has picked up my phone to look at a text message, and 30 minutes later, I'm scrolling through Instagram. It is designed to grab and keep our attention. And there's newer research, it's a little older than the technoference research, but there's newer research looking at this notion of attention economy, recognizing there is only so much you can actually give your attention to at one time in one day. And the goal of technology is to get it and keep it as frequently, as often, and as focused as possible. We also see the impact of blurred boundaries between home, school, work, social, hobbies that was really exacerbated by the pandemic, in which people were working from home. We have access to email and text messages on all of our devices all the time. I remember when cell phones were just for making phone calls or just sending text messages. I actually remember my very first BlackBerry when I thought it was so cool I could see my email on my cell phone. And now that constant demand for attention is going to interrupt the attention that I give to other relationships, including my children. And that is by design. The other piece in this nuance of human behavior and relationship that we're understanding from the research is making connections between technology use and addiction or addiction-like behaviors. And again, this requires distinguishing between the device and the content. So let's say, maybe I'm addicted to online shopping, or I have addictive behaviors associated with online shopping. I can do that on my cell phone. Thank you, Amazon. I can do that on my laptop. Thank you, Amazon. Or I could have addictive behaviors related to my cell phone. I'm probably not the only person that sometimes picks up my phone and I'm like, what did I pick this up for? And it just becomes a reflex or a habit in which we pick it up. And so I have my cell phone 6 inches away from me right now. I know where my cell phone is at most times. Could be classified into addictive behaviors. We're not here to diagnose or suggest that. But what we know about the device and the content that is so important to understand is that if we were all in a room together and we each consumed one beer of the same kind, there are certainly differences in the way our body would metabolize that. There's certainly differences, maybe, if someone took medication or didn't take medication, but essentially we all consumed the exact same substance. The same is not true with technology and with social media. If I spend an hour on social media and you each spend an hour on social media, we are not consuming the exact same substance. The algorithm is going to change your experience, my experience, someone else's experience to be exactly refined to your interests and the things that are going to demand your attention or further engage you in this attention economy that I was talking about. And so what we want to recognize is that the research also is complicated by we're not measuring the same substance for every person, the same consumption, that the device and the content are going to modify based on the user's experience. It just makes it a lot harder to fully understand the implications. So that's a lot about risk. And I just want to give a few suggestions before I hand it over to my colleagues about how we can move forward. And I would say, first and foremost, give yourself grace. Of course, you're going to have interruptions from technology. Of course, you're going to have moments where you might not be as kind of open or transparent about what you're doing or how you can integrate children into that interaction. So my first suggestion is, as often as you can, bring children in. If you are picking up your phone to check the weather for the baseball game you're going to go to, tell them that. Say, hey, let's look together. It also makes it more likely I'm not going to end up doom scrolling in Instagram. Set boundaries with yourself. If you are with other adults, you can also say, hey, I need to do 30 minutes. Can you focus on the children right now? And then switch, making sure that not all adults are on screens all the time. Reflect, adjust, and avoid shame for yourself or for other people. If you're setting expectations for yourself or your children, do so outside of the moment so that emotions are lower and the feelings of shame are less likely. And all the great ideas you're going to get from today and the follow-up resources, use them, reflect on them, but expect the landscape of technology and social media to continue to change. So stay as invested as you are right now. Thank you so much for your interest. I look forward to more conversation with you in the Q&A. But for now, I'm excited to turn it over to Norma Schwartz.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Norma Schwartz. I am the Director of Educator and Family Partnerships at Waterford.org, a national early learning nonprofit. Our programs combine the science of learning, the power of mentoring, and the promise of technology to ensure young learners have access to high quality early learning, early reading, math, and science experiences wherever it is they learn. A little bit about myself. I'm a proud Head Start graduate. I attended Head Start in my hometown of Miami, Florida. I consider myself a salt of the earth early ed educator. I also became a Head Start teacher. I was also a director at some point and have always worked in the early learning space. No matter the role I've held, I've always been able to work alongside not just our earliest learners, but their families and their educators. So I'm so excited to be able to join you today and share some insights and strategies on what technology looks like in an educational setting in the early learning years and what are some of the best practices. So as I mentioned earlier, I have the privilege of working with families, and in early learning, families are crucial because that is whom these youngest learners have spent the most time with. That's where they have gotten their foundational skills that they bring when they step foot into our classrooms. So one of the things that we focus on is ensuring that we include families when we're working with technology in the classroom, or just talking about and discussing what technology access and what it looks like at home. Technology shouldn't be something that is separate from family life, because it really isn't. It's something that they, as Christine had mentioned, they've been exposed to it. They have seen their parents basically at times be distracted by it. But it's something that as a family unit, we have the opportunity as educators to help them grow into implementing healthy tech practices at home. And one of the things that we notice is that when we think of young children at home, it's not so much that they're there with their parents. A lot of times we're starting to see intergenerational homes where now it's the child, a device, and Mima, grandma, who may have not grown up the way the parents have grown up, being exposed to technology. They may not be familiar with technology. They may not be comfortable with technology. So we as educators have a chance to bridge those experiences and teach them those healthy learning tech habits. One of the things that we like to encourage families is that although technology can be a source of so much information, so many great resources, you can get lost in tutorials and videos and how-tos and dream the biggest dreams just by consuming this technology. One of the things that we encourage families to do is that, yes, that's fun and that's great, but we want them to feel empowered that they can take these activities offline and encourage them to engage with their little ones, with their children, with their grandkids, in actually doing these activities in real life and without the use of screens. That, yes, you can see the most beautiful gardens and you can see the most beautiful recipe that looks simple, but in practice, and just take those and engage in those activities, because it really does help that bridge, especially for those family members that may not feel, they may not feel comfortable with the technology or how to manage the scrolling and everything the way the little ones do, but they are pretty comfortable in the garden, they are comfortable in the kitchen, and helping them make those connections where they feel that they too can be part of those interactions. So that brings me to, how do we combine hands-on activities for our earliest learners with technology? Again, it is a resource, it is a tool, but in no way, shape, or form can it ever replace those experiences that are so crucial in the early years. We know the importance of play, the importance of going out there and having those hands-on activities. And these are the things that we want to encourage the adults and educators, that yes, we have to, there is a place for technology, but where things get really enriched is when you're able to stretch those things that you're exposed to, and you're able to stretch them into those hands-on real life activities. So it's one of those things where you want to encourage educators and parents to really start looking at the type of technology, the type of media that they are consuming. Is it something that you're just passively consuming, or is it something that's going to enable you to get out there and do those activities with them that will help them in their development, in their skill building, whether it's academic, educational, or just having those experiences of of experimenting with different mediums and colors and things like that. So when we think about supporting our children as tech-savvy kids in early education, technology is changing very rapidly. And as educators, it's really important that we ourselves take the time to invest in learning about the tech. If we are going to have technology available in the classroom setting, it's very important that we take time to understand that there are going to be differences in the environment. So as we present technology in a classroom setting, one of the things that we coach teachers to do is just take some time, just the way when we're teaching toileting practices or hand washing practices. What it may look like at home is not necessarily going to be the same as what it looks like in the classroom. So what does this mean? So maybe at home, it's the TV and they have complete control over what's playing on the TV. They get to choose the show, the channel, they get to watch it while they're laying upside down on the couch, having their snacks. They get to maybe walk around with their own device, tablet, just roaming around the house. And it could look very different than in the classroom. So that's one of the things we advise teachers to kind of take into mind, that this could be not only a shift in the way they engage with technology, but just those environmental factors. So we really do encourage teachers to invest in routines and expectations, set those clear guidelines, like this is what it looks like in the classroom, in a learning environment. It could be just the setting, how the classroom is set up, where the device is. Maybe at home, they're used to having also a telephone that no one uses anymore, a tablet, but in the classroom, it's an actual desktop, it's an actual laptop. Even just getting around the device themselves. Some of them, yes, they're experts at scrolling, but this may be the very first time that they have a mouse in their hands. And that is going to take some fine motor coordination, some hand-eye coordination, which are the very skills that they are still developing. So everything can be used in a developmentally appropriate way, but we just need to be intentional. We need to be very careful and intentional about the way we do it, so that we're promoting growth and we're going with the flow of where they are at that moment in time. And it can be that maybe that child is not there yet, that they're still working on other skills, and that's perfectly fine. So just with any learning that happens in early learning, that there is some time, there is some learning that does need to take place. As teachers, it's important that we have the opportunity to foster the digital citizenship, to be able to take the time to model what responsible tech use looks like. So I am going to go ahead, and I look forward to continuing the conversation, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Ronah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ronah Harris. I am the CEO and founder of a consultancy called Pattern. I also lecture at NYU, and I have a heavy background in producing a lot of media for children, particularly young children, through the work that I've done at Sesame Street. Today, I want to talk to you all about a few things. First of all, our organization has, over the past, I guess, 15 years, we've been able to partner up with a lot of the folks who make media for young children. And through that work, we've seen that there are a lot of experiences that young children have that, in fact, most adults are not really tuned into. First of all, the majority of programs that a lot of young children have access to are not fully monitored. We know that there's tons of content that enters into streams that are available to young children without any understanding of sort of like what COPA rights are or what type of information we want young children to access. And because of that, it's extremely important that educators and parents keep a real close watch on the content that is available. Though there are plenty of reasons why large corporations would and should continue to protect young children, it gets very difficult given the fact that technology has permeated so many parts of our lives and really is accessible in many different platforms and ways for young children to access. That being said, our company has really worked at encouraging children to become both problem solvers and to explore pretty much everything. And because of that, we take a different approach to technology in understanding that we don't necessarily want young children to walk away from technology. We want them to build technology competencies. And we really want to close what we find is sort of like today's digital divide. It's not people who can't access advanced technologies, because we know across all developing countries and in specifically the US, we have a lot of access to advanced technology. But we do know that there's a huge lack of skill and understanding when it comes to the use of these new forms of digital technology, and that there is a growing disparity, not just amongst generations, but intergenerationally, where we have children who may have complete access and open freedom to learn how to navigate the web, access information, increase their literacy. And then we have those children who will be exposed to high amounts of artificially generated material and no one to guide them. And because of that divide, we really have to sort of like focus on skills that we can teach and encourage children to practice these skills when they're working within our programs. So we know that there's this knowledge to tools gap. Basically, in order to address that divide, we have to really say, how can we actually hand over the right tools and how can we teach kids to use them effectively? There's a great study that came out in the Wall Street Journal last year, and it talked about how Gen Zers, who are, today's tweens and teens, how they looking at digital technology, and though they could do wonderful things with tech, build websites, look at apps, if you ask them to do something like type, that was a fundamental technology skill that they just never gained. They didn't access those skills, and because of it, there are large gaps in being able to use the tools effectively, large gaps in being able to express themselves with the tools. In such a rapidly evolving digital world, we know that kids can, of course, consume, but what we really want is for them to understand, to create, and to innovate with technology. And so how do we do that? Well, schools, parents, and educators all have to foster a balance between technology skills, technology use, and responsible digital citizenship. And in order to do that, we have to both impact young people at home, but also in all of the other places that young people have access to technology. And for that, that means after school programs, libraries, public centers, and online communities as well. For young people, especially for those who are growing up with access to high-speed internet on handheld devices, they are experiencing multiple layers of information at all touch points. And while school and preschool may be a primary place where we actually have some control over those devices and access, all of the other spaces that young people are in should also be exemplifying and sharing those goals and that vision. What our company has done over the past few years has really said, how can we increase the tools? How can we increase young people's skills? And how can we change their mindset so that when they have an opportunity to access technology, they use it in what we would call like a wise way. And so for a number of reasons, there's some programs that we really feel would help educators as you set about really wanting to focus on young people and how to close that tool divide. The first is to understand that technology is embedded in all of their lives. It's in their education, their entertainment, their social interactions. We want to expose them to digital platforms such as Scratch Junior, which may help with logical thinking and problem solving at a really young age. We also really continue to want to teach coding. We want to give them some skills about recognizing misinformation and protecting their privacy. We also really, really want them to express themselves. So giving them opportunities to make digital art, animation, music, and production. And most of all, we want them to experiment, to fail, and to iterate, because that will build their confidence and their creative abilities. When we give children a chance to actually use these tools and devices, not just to be consumers, but to be producers, we're fostering their creativity, we're increasing their critical thinking, and we are able to exemplify responsible technology use. I just want to encourage you all to kind of find a balance between low tech and high tech. There are opportunities for all of our children to have access to both. And there are a lot of creative resources that you can reach out to this community to implement in your practice. Thanks.
To join us. So thank you all for joining us once again. So I'll invite all of you to join me in having a conversation. If you can turn on your screens and come back. We've had a lot of questions in the chat and so forth. One of the things that I think we're all agreeing on is that this work is rapidly, rapidly changing. And there's, even things that we thought a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about certain children not having access. Well, that's not really the conversation anymore. And so it's changing very quickly. So the idea that our children don't have access is really not it. It's how they're using the material, how we use it as teachers and educators, and emphasizing what we've always emphasized in early childhood, which is the importance of relationships. In using this. I'd like to hear you, Christine, talk a little bit more about the informed risk and how even as teachers of young children, we think about these informed risks. And I'd like to hear all of you talk about how we can help our children be more creative and express themselves, as Ronah pointed out, using technology, not just consuming all of these videos that they rapidly turn to. Christine, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Valora. I had actually written that down from when Ronah was speaking, also the idea of shifting from consuming to creating and being innovative. And so when we think about kind of our principles around teaching, a key practice is being intentional And so also thinking back about Rona's mention of having digital competencies and recognizing what is the purpose or the function of what we're doing with children, or how do we take an intrinsic interest and move it from consumption to something like creativity or innovation.
Mhm.
So a key thing that I think is important in early childhood is spending significant amount of time outside. So you know you have a child who wants to be on a device. How do you take that interest in the device outdoors and make it something meaningful? We know there's things like geocaching. We know we could do things like plant identification apps. We can do a photo scavenger hunt, but helping them think about how is technology a tool in relationship, in experience that gives them that experience to develop digital competency, but also to think about how can we make sure they're still having those other rich experiences that include things like nature and movement and connecting different ideas and concepts. So I would lean hard on the idea of being intentional. And as far as being informed, just engaging in webinars like this and using the resources that you highlighted, Valora, and the other presenters have talked about, just to think about what can we continually try to understand and always exercise with good intent for child outcomes and experiences.
What are your thoughts, Rona? You're working with teachers every day. Do you see these kinds of practices being widely used among teachers, or what are you actually seeing when you're working with teachers?
So I see a wide array of things, and I have an opportunity to be in um, rural schools, large urban schools. So there's a wide range, private, public, charter. I would say one mission that I've always had, which is how do we get all teachers on board with sort of like Tech for America, not Teach for America. We have pedagogues, but then we have this other layer, which is technology, right? And so if you're given a lot of canned material, you put your child in front of it, they have headphone on, you might be teaching them how to use a mouse or a keyboard, you know, like Christine mentioned earlier. These are great tools, but that's not actually determining if the child understands what they're doing, if they're able to process it fully. We have a big divide, and it's only getting larger, unfortunately. We have to pull back and say, okay, what are some great practices that are in communities where there's time invested in the technology, where there are staffing supports available for new teachers transitioning into use of technology, and then how do we actually use technology that's not passive? And so those are sort of like the big questions. I have seen a wide array. I know we have some maker educators and some technologists on this call. They're leading a charge that the larger populations need. They needed it yesterday, but they need for tomorrow.
What are you seeing at Waterford?
Well, we're seeing a wide array of things. We're seeing that technology in educational spaces, it used to be only for the K through 12 space. And that's, and now we're starting to see it in early learning, where before it was kind of it was something that has been used in early learning classrooms as an entertainment thing, as a passive, like it's movie day or we're going to watch this. When we come in, we're also that bridge to the shift where technology in the best use should not be passive. It should be interactive. It should be engaging. And it's not the type of thing that you turn it on and the teacher walks away and learning happens. It is something that we work with teachers, that this is a shared experience. This is something that they have to be a part of and oversee. So there is a lot of learning, a lot of but also understanding that we're coming into early learning spaces where we want to absolutely drive home the point that this is something that is only going to take 15 minutes of that learning day. The rest of the day should be those hands-on activities, being outside, and the teacher does what the early educator is there to do, which is to help build those connections, those relationships, and all those things. So it's being able to bring all those things together.
Yeah, it's really challenging, particularly since, I don't know that a lot of teachers of young children are really prepared to think creatively
Mhm,
about using technology with young children. Do
mhm.
you find, you're working at the University of Michigan, Christine, do you find that a lot of teacher education is really helping teachers of young children to know how to do the kinds of things that all of you are talking about?
That's a good question, and I certainly can't speak in every space. I think that conversation might vary, driven by the curriculum that the program is using, the quality standards that programs are leaning on, and there's also, I think, there's variations between degree programs, between an emphasis on child development, early childhood education, pre-K, through 3, and I think that can also kind of drive the focus of the experiences or guidance for teachers, students becoming teachers. So I think it varies, which isn't a great answer for you. But I think a reason it varies goes back to what all of us talked about and this rapid development of technology that we're all trying to keep up. The technology develops rapidly. We get pressure from parents, pressure from marketing. We have standards. Then you have to get the funding, and then you have to get the equipment, and then you get the training. And then we're like, now there's new technology out there. And what do we need to understand about it? So I would say those variations in practices and exposure and opportunity have to do with this rapid development.
Mhm. I know that I come into contact with a lot of parents who feel so conflicted. I really liked your emphasis on giving yourself grace because, oftentimes we see that tech devices are giving to babies, toddlers as a way of pacifying them or keeping them quiet or keeping them occupied. So I'd like to hear what advice you will all give to parents. I mean, you talked a lot about the attention economy and being distracted and some of the risk. I think we have to acknowledge that this is an experiment, all of this work that we're doing with children, young children and technology. There's not the long-term research, that a lot of it is a risk. But let's give some advice to parents and people at home. And as educators, we're often parents too. So, what advice would you give to parents as they're trying to navigate this brand new world?
I can kick off, and I'm gonna pull in from my experience as a parent that I'm raising teenagers, and as much as adults, we want to preserve our own personal space of I don't need the TikTok, and I don't need this, and I don't need that. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of the technology and what's out there is basically geared towards our young ones, and part of parenting is being informed about that. So one of the things that I've come, my early learning brain is, let's normalize as parents having those shared experiences from that very early learning time, whatever it is they're consuming when they're 4, 5, and being hip to it, being investing time and learning about what's capturing their attention, so that when you do find yourself with teenagers, it's not completely outrageous and out of bounds when you do want to share in those same activities with them, when you do want to be hip to whatever it is that's consuming them, or whatever their learning environment is requiring of them. So it's just one of those things that we start when they're early as parents, then it just makes it a natural progression as they get older and develop and start exploring other technology that has not been invented yet, that's coming our way.
I know the American Academy of Pediatrics says that, they give that advice through age 5 that you should really be co-watching with your child, which I don't know how frequently that happens. I wonder about that. But after that, they say families should have a media plan. You should have a media plan. I don't know how many families actually have a media plan, but actually having a media plan. One of the things that I'm wondering about is that it seems to me that a lot of what young children are consuming is teaching them brand loyalty, which is teaching them about products, which is teaching them to go out in the world and want things and buy things and have things. And I'm wondering if you see that, what the research is about that, but that seems to be what I'm observing.
I can speak to that a little bit, and then I'll hand it over to Ronah. I saw you unmute there. You're absolutely right, Valora. We know that there are intentional marketing efforts to develop brand loyalty, and there is a specific company geared toward children that had a target of X number of exposures per day, and it was effective. Being really mindful, again, not to put anyone on blast on a recording, but there's definitely significant, substantial evidence that a target of X number of exposures per day increases sales, revenue, brand loyalty, product development, and it's pervasive. That loyalty by age 2, which is a specific target, extends well into adulthood. And so we know children, they develop symbol recognition before they can read. So creating really easy to identify symbols, creating, using kind of intentional mechanisms to create endorphins and dopamine and good feelings around technology experiences and brands can increase that loyalty. And so there's definitely research that's showing it's being used intentionally and it's effective.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the classic research that tells us that by 6 months, children are able to understand the golden arches and what that means. And so for constant digital access, where they're getting imprints of icons, voices, audio, visual cues, press the button and you will get, they're constantly being generated with ideas and focus on brands and identification.
Absolutely. There's so much to learn about this. I know that many of you have been writing the chat, and I want to at this time invite you, those of you who are watching live, to join us at the after party. If you want to really ask a question of these 3 panelists or interact with other people who are listening, we really invite you to join us. There's a link in the chat that you can click. And if you click that, you'll be able to join and interact with our panelists in a way that a Zoom show does not particularly allow. And for those of you who will not be joining the after party, we want to encourage you to come back next month, where we're going to be talking about putting the power back into play. And we're going to have the distinguished Kathy Hirsch-Pasek come and talk with us about play, as well as Anthony Toombs and Robin Meister from the Boston Children's Museum. So come back next week and we're going to talk about what's new in play and how we can put more power into play. I want to thank all of you for joining us today on this CAYL webinar series, and thank all of the staff who helped to put this all together. We really appreciate you joining to learn with the CAYL Institute today. Please click the chat and join us in the after conversation that we want to have about children and technology. Thank you and have a very good day. See you next month.